Okay. Oh, actually, this is the run of show. Hi, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful morning session. Eleni is going to change what's on the screen, but we're going to finish with the enlightening session with 4 presentations that feature speakers who are here in the room, I also, before we get started, would like to remind you that we have, concurrent with everything that's been running, the Jamboard session, which is going on. There's been some good participation there, but that link will be reshared, and feel free to, both whether you're in person or online, to add ideas and concepts to the Jamboard. Okay, and the first one will be Francesca.
I'm going to do this. Good morning, good afternoon, I guess it's afternoon. Francesca Sampson from the, good point, thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I'm Francesca Sampson from the University of Texas at Austin, the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And I was trained and worked as a practicing full-time artist for 30 years. And that's my background. And, but now I work with scientists around the country, around the globe, that are looking to understand their climate data better and looking to get a better picture into the complexities and relationships that are within their data. And so I come from a slightly different perspective. I'm not a graphic designer, but I'm more teasing out solutions that will help scientists to answer their specific science questions. So these are the 2 factors. Oh, I'm sorry. These are, oh, you got the one with, oh, sorry. Oh, you got the wrong one. These are the 2 factors that drive our approach to climate visualization. And namely, that harmony and beauty matters, and that the visualization community as a whole would benefit from a richer vocabulary on which to depict their data. Because right now we have spheres and cubes and whatnot. And the second part is, our stories don't talk about the data that we're showing, or climate change data. Rather, they tell the story of the climate change researchers' process. So what are they studying? Why are they studying it? How do they study it? What leads them to their next questions? These things are fascinating. They're just fascinating. And so we find that that is the way we get around what I call the gloom and doom overwhelm. So we find that these stories go far enough. I'm going to talk about this. ABR, this is the tool that we have created to enable artists to work with large-scale, these are huge data simulations, but with the tools and the things that they need to control on a daily basis. So we can control the shape, the size, the density, we can build color maps, we can put on textures, all kinds of things that as an artist I'm going to want. And so sometimes they get a little complex, but we begin to hone in on what characteristics are easily discernible within a crowded field and which ones are important, and balancing those aspects. So for instance, we have density, texture, curvilinear, angular form. We've done some research on this. And the other advantage is that we can have association. So this is about chlorophyll and nitrates. And you can see there are 3, the red and the orange are related. Oh, chlorophyll and nitrates went away. And the green curly guys were the chlorophyll. And, but it also creates a compelling visualization that we find draws people in, especially on those large screen displays. And you can find us at It's sculptingviz.com. Sculptingviz.com.
Thank you, Francesca. So what you're seeing is one of the most complete pictures of global carbon dioxide to date and shows how interconnected the world's greenhouse gas problem is. Our team at the Scientific Visualization Studio worked along NASA scientists from the Global Modeling and Simulation Office to visualize global carbon dioxide data extracted from the GEOS model for a one-year period. The GEOS model assimilates data from NASA's Orbiting Carbon Observatory 2 and is also informed by satellite observations along with about 1 million weather observations collected every hour. Thanks to the GEOS model, we can now see in 3 dimensions the accumulation of global carbon dioxide, its seasonal movement at the global scale, and the diurnal rhythm of our planet's largest forests. The visualization was created to support a series of presentations from NASA for the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference. NASA scientists and leadership delivered their address to the United Nations in front of a hyperwall system while showing climate visualizations. At the Scientific Visualization Studio, we create visualizations in various resolutions and formats in close collaborations with NASA scientists. Following this practice, the visualization was released publicly along with a high-level overview, a short description of the visualization, the techniques utilized, and a listing of the data sources. All these in efforts to support openness, transparency, and reproducibility. NASA's unique combination of observed and modeled data plays a critical role in helping scientists to better understand how our climate is changing by tracking increases in global carbon dioxide as they happen. Creating and releasing openly data visualizations to share such scientific insights has a direct impact in visual climate science communication, especially when such visualizations become the focal point during presentations to policymakers and international forums. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Furuzan Danisand, and today I'll be talking about a data physicalization that shows CO2 emission data of 7 largest emitters in the world. To engage people with these important data, we decided to represent it in a tangible and playful and interactive way. So as you're seeing, in this design, we started with an identical shape for all the countries, and then with every 200 million tons of CO2 emission, we added 1 loop to the outer of this central shape. As a result, the overall size of each country is showing the overall amount of CO2 emission in that region. So by just looking at this, people are able to make cross-country comparisons and get a ballpark estimation of CO2 emission in each region. And also through a closer examination of model, they can retrieve more accurate data. For example, in India with 12 loops, 2,400 million tons of CO2 emission is produced. People also can approach the model and interact with it. By taking the middle part and expanding it, they are able to learn about the population and emission per capita. The population is mapped to the density of the texture. So the more populated the country, the denser the pattern. For example, China with 1.4 billion population is 10 times denser than Russia with 140 population, or EU with 500 population is 4 times denser than Japan with 125 million population. The interaction of density and the overall size defines the amount to which each country can expand, which shows the emission per capita. This reflects the actual relationship in data, which emission per capita is a result of total emission divided by population. So people can interact with different regions and compare them. Some of them are harder to poll, some of them are easier to poll, which shows the emission per capita and population of countries. For instance, China has more population, but as you can see, US expands way more, which shows the high per capita emission of US. Also, India and China has similar density, therefore similar population, but China expands more, so shows the minimal per capita in India. We exhibited this work in a gallery, and people found it engaging, informative, and interactive. Thanks.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I'm going to give a quick talk. Well, first, let me apologize to everyone online. We have the captions, which are timed to the recorded video, but we're giving live video, and sometimes those are going to be out of whack. For my presentation, you'll see they're very out of whack, so I apologize for that in advance. But you can go ahead and play. I'm going to talk about a visualization we released this spring, which we're calling NASA's Climate Spiral. This was inspired by the visualization that Ed Hawkins showed this morning that he released in 2016 and was widely popular. It was shot on the Olympics, viewed by millions of people. In this case, we are taking NASA data. This is the global temperature record that's produced by the Goddard Institute for Space Studies. So this integrates all the world's climate stations and tries to produce a global temperature and a temperature map. And in this case, this record runs from 1880 to today. You see many of the same features. It's a slightly different data set with a slightly different baseline than the one Ed showed. But there are a few things in this that are designed to attract attention, especially on social media. The square format of the video, the energy of the spiral, the building, and this sort of rapid building at the end. And this intentional, see how we allow it to overflow the boundaries to sort of surprise the visitor. But the thing that really captured people's attention was this surprise twist to a 3D view, and the 3D view allowing you to see that increase in the temperatures over time. And so this has been very successful on social media. I think part of it is just the aesthetics, the aesthetic appeal of the 3D structure. And we've seen multiple social media venues where it's received millions and millions of views. And that also leads to comments, which we provide this rich database to understand how people interact with it. The social media has led to traditional media, and also it's led to people who take the data themselves and have provided, sort of remixed and reused that visualization, creating their own augmented reality version or interactive version. All right. Thank you very much. That's the end of our in-person presentations. I'd like to invite the rest of my fellow speakers for this section, the other 4 speakers, and we can have a short Q&A about these 4 presentations. So if there are any questions in the room, and yet please come up. If you can handle maybe I'll handle it. Here, you. What? I'll take care of it. Okay. We have any questions in the room?
Start with him.
Michael. You get this very first.
I may have. There we go. It was switched off. Okay, my name is Michael Böttinger, and I'm with the German Climate Computing Center, and I thank you for the nice presentations of everyone. My first question is to Francesca. Good to see you. The 3D glyphs you showed or you used to visualize different quantities in the ocean water have a direction. Is this arbitrary?
No, nothing there is arbitrary. So let me clarify, okay? So we use a couple of things. The data, these are 3-dimensional data sets. It was underneath the Ronny-Filchner ice shelf. And we use a sampling algorithm, Metropolis Hastings sampling algorithm, I don't know what it is, to sample by density. And then we also have vector data, and we use that for the currents. And then what I use the direction for, I find it's actually easiest to read the visualization if it's a random direction. However, I can direct those glyphs in line in or by their vector. And so I sometimes do that. But it's a new program. It's only a few years old. We're working with it, and it's a real tricky balance between what's too much and what can you really put in there. And so we're still really exploring that specific distribution of attention. Does that answer your question?
Well, okay, I asked if the direction was arbitrary, and it looked like that.
So you're talking about the direction of the glyphs.
Yeah.
So in that video, the direction of the glyphs was arbitrary. We can direct the direction, however, and sometimes we do that. But by leaving it arbitrary, it actually makes it more holistic from a distance and easier to read.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for Farzan. It's a really interesting physicalization. And, you know, we often, even when we're just creating visuals, we often talk about trying to make people feel the data rather than just see it, but you're literally letting people feel that data. Do you have a sense that this resonates with an audience who's maybe doesn't respond to just a purely visual experience?
So you mean people with visually impaired?
Or maybe younger people as well? Or?
We exhibited this work for 3 months in this exhibition, and interestingly, children were very excited to interact with it. We aimed to make something which is playful, and our observations showed that it was playful for children. But for other people, like for visually impaired people, what I was focusing on was the feeling of expansion, which is a new way of representing data, and they are distinguishably different from each other. So just without like vision and looking at it, just by feeling different regions and playing with that, you will understand how different regions are different, and the data will appear to you. But there is also the possibility for counting if they're looking for precision. I don't know if that answered.
That's perfect, thank you.
Okay, let's continue. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move on to our panel discussion. And just to frame that, we really want to, in this panel discussion, explore the idea of what impact means. Clearly, we've seen enough examples that impact can have many different forms, right? So is it a video that's been seen by millions and millions of people that goes viral on the internet? Is it something that can be very impactful in terms of changing policy, right? This, you know, the story is that Boris Johnson's opinion of climate change happened after he sat down with scientists and saw a series of charts. A similar thing happened actually at NASA. Or is it some of these kinds of things that we've seen this morning and in the enlightening session where the visualization, because it's seen in an expected way or an unexpected place, is bringing new people into the climate conversation, perhaps people who weren't paying attention before. So these are all different ways that you can have impact, but perhaps there are more. And we want to hear from a diverse group of people about how a visualization can have impact and what forms that impact can take. So we've assembled a panel with a variety of backgrounds. We have in person here, we have Min Chen, who is a scientific visualization researcher. We have the other three panelists are all joining us online. We have Andrea Poli, who is an artist, a data artist who does large-scale physicalizations of data, often with real-time sensors. We have Zachary Laib, who is a climate researcher at Princeton. He was also committed to doing visualizations, especially targeted towards social media. So he is releasing visualizations constantly on social media and has a huge following of people who follow his regular updates of visualizations. And we have Rehana Maktoufi, who is a science communication researcher and understands deeply some of these these issues that come into climate communication, which is a topic which is so fraught with emotion and politics. And so we want to have an opportunity to hear from each of them. The way we'll structure this panel is everyone's going to give a short talk, and then we'll come together for some questions. So Min Chen will come first, and they'll be live, and then we'll have the virtual presentations.
Okay, and thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. And it's quite enjoyable, and as most people here probably, seeing all those visualization telling the story about the climate or engaging users and so on. So I'm going to talk about from a slightly different dimension. And traditionally, the visualization have widely been considered for dissemination purpose. So we create a visualization, we engage in audience and so on, and that is certainly one particular purpose of a visualization. Then of course, before disseminated visualization, particularly in the climate science, and you can easily imagine there's the modeling and the measurement, data collection, and so on, and the scientists did a fair amount of work, which usually is hidden from the audience directly. And some part of the results were selected for dissemination purpose. So we encountered a similar scenario during the COVID and in the UK, and we have a large number of modeling scientists for modeling the COVID scenario in the country, and they did need a lot of visualization support. So in the UK, and a lot of visualization scientists and researchers volunteered to help them initially and later receive government funding for that. I'll just quickly show you the tiny small story, and when Professor Richard Reeve first engaging with us, and he really wants us to do disseminated visualization. He said that that's the visualization for is the V in pink circle and towards the end of the modeling. Then I mentioned that I said that during the modeling process, there must be so much data involving observing the real data coming in, observing whether the prediction is correct in whatever regions and so on. Perhaps you need a lot of visualization. And Richard is such a wonderful, open-minded scientist. He said, yeah, just go ahead. And he changed his diagram, put the pink V sign everywhere in the picture. So there's a lot of Vs everywhere. And in the diagram at the end. So we did a lot of work. Then I started wondering why we need that. Then because the modeling scientist has a lot of parameters they need to change dealing with the modeling. So they have a lot of action need to take. They modify one little bit parameter, and they are observing a little bit data, modify some parameter, try that again, and every week and so on, they do a lot. But meanwhile, if you think from the audience point of view, what are their tasks? So their task is to more or less determine whether the global warming is real or not real. So their task is much simpler, smaller, and in some ways a binary. So those people already agreed with scientists. What will be their task? So of course we have a visualization, we reinforce the idea, keep reminding them and do something. But can we make them as well, like a modeling scientist, they really want to see the data. And this meant, ideally, they be part of a stakeholder, much closer. So if they can acting on some data, just like modeling scientists acting, they probably would want to observe data every week, every month in that way. How can we do that? Then if we can relate to the climate with the actions, for example, I put CO2 and so on, anyone can potentially do something to help in that kind of area if we can collect the data And if they can observe those data on a regular basis and take actions to change their behaviors, and in some way, we somehow have the impact. So idea is, during COVID, we have so much data visualization, and there's some wonderful visualization. For example, my students are looking around the world to see what type of visualization may potentially use for impact on ordinary people. And in the USA, for example, they identify Arizona State and produce some wonderful dashboards, and you almost sort of wanted to see those data on a weekly and monthly basis. So talk about impact. If we have the amount of environment and the climate-related visualization, just like a COVID period, and related to the local region, related to our personal life, and we have a real impact, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Min.
Hello, my name is Zachary Labe, and I'm really excited to be joining you today to talk a little bit more about climate change and data visualization. Just a little bit of a background on me. I want to point out that I am definitely not a vision expert, like many of you are here attending this conference. I'm actually a climate scientist with a background in a bit of meteorology, and my research is really all about disentangling climate change versus climate variability. So I'm the person who's sort of sitting at the computer all day and looking at climate model projections and trying to make sense of it using other statistical techniques. But I got really interested in science communication in the last couple of years through data visualization and how we can use data visualization as another way to communicate climate change. And that's what I'm here to talk about with you today. So one of my areas of research is around the Arctic. So one of the key facts about Arctic climate change is that the Arctic is warming more than 3 times faster than the global average. So you can typically, when we sort of show this type of fact, we present a line graph like the one you might see here, with the Arctic being the white line. And you can see that that is warming a lot faster than areas like over global land or global ocean, which are the red and blue lines. But when I start my talks on sort of Arctic climate change, I like to try to bring a bit of different perspective. So I usually put up this slide, and I purposely and intentionally leave off any labels on these maps. So what you're looking at to orient yourself is you're looking downward at the North Pole in 40 some little maps. And there are colors, as you might notice, that go from sort of blue shading to red shading, but there's some variability. It's not all going from blue to red. Some areas are getting redder than others. So I like you to just take a moment to see what patterns you might notice in this type of presentation. And then after you have a minute to sort of look at these each individual maps, I'll add the actual labels. So what you're seeing here is temperature anomalies. And this is for each year from 1979 to 2021. This is temperature anomaly in climate science. When we say that, it sort of means the departure from average. So anywhere that's sort of red shading is warmer than average and blue shading is colder than average. And this is the period of time we have satellite observations for. So this again is getting at the key point that the Arctic is rapidly warming, but there's still some year-to-year and some spatial variability, which are key concepts in sort of understanding climate change. And sort of the crux of my talk is really all about data visualization as a form of storytelling. I think when I first started, experimenting with using data visualization for science communication, I kept thinking back to many workshops on science communication that say, stay away from graphs and numbers and facts when you're communicating climate change and tell more human-driven stories. And I thought, oh no, I'm doing quite the opposite. I'm actually throwing graphs at people to communicate climate change. But I've since come to think of now this sort of method of data visualization as a really powerful way to tell stories that we can reach all sorts of audiences as just another form of science communication on climate change. And to me, this is really an opportunity to communicate. I don't think there is one correct way for science communication of climate change. I think it takes many different ways to reach different audiences. And I think really experimenting with data visualization is a really great opportunity for this. So one way that I want to talk a little about what I mean for impact for data visualization, and one example I want to give is talk about Arctic sea ice. So what you're looking at here is just a simple schematic of Arctic sea ice in a typical year. So what I mean by that is it has this seasonal cycle where you have more sea ice in the winter and less sea ice at the end of the summer. So most media outlets, when they report on changes in the Arctic, would sort of focus on these two periods. What is the maximum extent of the ice? And then it's sort of at the end of summer, which is actually last week, they would talk about the minimum extent of sea ice. But sort of how I want to think of, communicating data specifically about climate change is how can we, tell more stories about what's going on in the Arctic? So for me, I started experimenting on Twitter by posting many, many updates almost every day about changes in sea ice in the Arctic. And I'm not saying I'm the first person to do this. Many people, have different graphs for communicating climate change data. For decades, they've had these. But I think we're really starting to see a growing number of people track climate data in real time, almost like they do tracking the weather. We all know that weather is something we talk about day to day, but climate change, maybe not so much outside of our sort of climate circles. So for sea ice, we can see one particular year. Here's 2016 in red, and you can see that there's lots of bumps all throughout the year, which correlated to really extreme events that captured media attention to cover heat waves in the Arctic or really unusual amounts of sea ice. And to me, this is all about how we can use data visualization for impacting climate stories. And again, it all gets at this idea that climate change is happening in real time. We often think of it as happening something far in the future, but it's actually happening now. And we can use data visualization to talk about this in real time. And again, it's an opportunity to share stories. We can talk about extreme events. Here's one example of a big heat wave that happened in the Arctic. It only lasted for a few days, but it was well outside the records. So I posted this sort of graph of Arctic temperature relative to average in previous years. And you can see in the red line there that it's quite an outlier year. And this captured so much media attention for weeks, talking about what is the context of this extreme event. And then there are other events, that might not have been picked up by those two stories for Arctic sea ice, the maximum minimum. And one of those was in the Bering Sea back in the winter of 2018, where there was essentially a lack of sea ice in the Bering Sea during the middle of winter, which really had substantial impacts to indigenous communities all along the Bering Sea. And by using data visualization, we can tell these types of stories and start many conversations. Again, just another example here is talking about a Siberian heat wave that really had a large impact over the region, which is captured by data visualization. So I want to point out one of the submissions this year, and I want to start off with the typical graph when we think of carbon dioxide is the Keeling curve, which is what you might notice here. There's sort of an upward increase that's due to the emission of fossil fuels. But you can see also there's that seasonal cycle, the ups and downs. But one of the submissions this year took a different approach for thinking about carbon dioxide, and they showed sort of a spatial representation of it. We often think of it, there's just this graph going up, but what does it really look like over our planet? This really communicates the idea of well-mixed greenhouse gases and that there's a seasonal cycle. You can see other interesting features here. And to me, this graphic is all about telling climate change stories. So I just want to wrap up here by saying that I think we can really use data visualization, even really simple graphs, to really make big impacts. And to me, a high impact graphic is all about sharing and telling climate stories all throughout the course of the year. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the other perspectives by the panelists in this workshop. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Andrea Poli. I'm an artist and a professor of art and engineering at the University of New Mexico. And in thinking about this idea of high impact visualizations, I came up with three points that has come out of the work that I've created in translating data into experiences. And I think the first one has to do with data interpretation being multisensorial to have a higher impact. And I actually started that way. I did not start out doing data visualizations. I was doing sonification work, so translating data to sound. And I did, for example, this piece working with a meteorologist, a 16-channel sound sonification of data from a hurricane, historical hurricane that hit the east coast of the U.S. And my model, even though the sound ended up being somewhat musical, my model for sonifications has always been the soundscape. So I've done a lot of research into soundscape and how people are immersed in a soundscape and how they're experiencing a soundscape all the time, and that it actually gives them an understanding of the character of where they live or where they are at any moment. So I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica and work alongside these amazing scientists. These are some of them in the dry valleys. And I created a audio CD of sonifications called Sonic Antarctica on the Green Reporter label. And this combined soundscape recordings, sonifications of climate-related data, and voices of scientists. So I conducted quite a few interviews. And it was important to have those voices there, I think, to create a context for what people were listening to, kind of an ad. They were listening to something that is kind of abstract. Let me just play a little excerpt of a part of Sonic Antarctica.
We're at the Taylor Glacier Met Station. The main thing that we're trying to do is monitoring long-term climate.
So I'll stop there. So multisensorial, and I wanted to move on to public space to reach a larger audience with my work, a larger sort of real-time audience. And I think that what came into play quite a bit with some of my public works is that the visualization is connected to the viewer's full body experience. And here's what I mean by that. The scale is often quite large, and often the data is real time that's being translated. This project is called Particle Falls. And what you see here is a beautiful blue waterfall that in real time, as particulate pollution is detected, PM 2.5 specifically, that the orange sparkles show up on the surface of the waterfall. And then if there's a lot of PM 2.5, for example, a diesel truck pulls up to the monitor, that turns into a fireball. And in addition to the kind of just physical effect of something really large, the real-time impact, I think, has been really important. And people have told me that as they see something change on the projection, they'll hold their breath because they know that this is real-time data and there's particulate pollution that's impacting them. I had the opportunity to show this piece in conjunction with COP21 in Paris with the climate conference. So really trying to have an impact on policy and other issues related to pollution and climate change and fossil fuel emissions. So the third item that I thought about is how viewers can take ownership of the visualization. If the visualization is high impact, people take ownership of it. The viewers take ownership of it. So I had, people would say, this is our waterfall in North Carolina and other places. I've shown that around the country. And this piece is another example. This is energy flow. It was on the Rachel Carson Bridge in Pittsburgh for 2 years. and powered by 16 custom wind turbines, visualizing in light, in an abstract way, wind power potential. And let me just try to play a little bit of that animation so you can see. So in this case, it's integrated with an existing piece of architecture over almost 100 years old. It can be seen at different times of day, different times of the year, in conjunction with different types of events. And so there's a real sense of ownership that people have, and also that full body experience of changing, seeing it from a number of different physical locations at different times of day. Since this is Rainbow Rain is a real-time visualization of wind speeds, and so you can see that the viewers could see that at different times of day, at times of the year, and get a sense of kind of what was happening. So, to change your physical body position can have an impact in looking at something. And then, of course, taking that opportunity of having a high impact visualization and providing information to people, providing context, just like providing that the voices of the scientists on the citation. Hey, thanks a lot.
Hi, my name is Rehana Maktoufi, and I'm a Science Communication and Outreach Fellow at HMI Tanglebank Studios. We are a impact production company, and we produce content about science and nature and conservancy. And I will be talking today about all the flavors of impactful data visualization and communication. And I would like to just acknowledge the fight going on for women, life, and freedom in the streets of Iran, where my brothers and sisters are literally sacrificing their lives for the impact that they believe in. So I just want to start with just impact. What is impactful communication? And I personally usually think of strategic communication as a way to guide how I think about impact. Impact to me has layers, right? So you can think of your final goal, which is the impact as a behavior change. So what behavior do I want to change with the science communication that I'm doing or with the visualizations that I'm using? But before you have that last layer of impact, you have a layer right before that, right? And those are your objectives. Those are the beliefs you want to change, the feelings you want to change, the frames you want people to think differently to get to that final impact, that goal, right? So there is like a middle impact that you want to have. However, some of those impacts for your objectives might or might not work, right? I'm not going to talk about the rest of this strategic communication line because we don't have enough time. But basically, when you think of your impact, you're like, okay, I want, for example, people to plant more trees, right? That's my goal. That's my final goal. And my objective, that middle impact, is going to be, I'm going to get people to believe that planting trees is very important, or that here are all the ways you can plant trees. So you might be educating them, right? And a lot of times that might be working, right? So information provision in that case might be working. However, there are other times, some of these strategies that we're using, some of those middle objectives that we have might not be as impactful. A good example is when we think of information provision, because for the longest time we thought, oh, if we just like provide people with information and educate them about a lot of these content, for example, especially when it gets to climate change or vaccination, then we get to that final impact. We get people to change their behavior, right? But we have seen through our experience right now with the COVID situation that a lot of information provision and education is not changing people's minds. So the impact that you had in mind, that in some cases works, right? Because it's just people need information. In other cases, because it's so polarized, it might not have that final impact. A good example of that is a study done by Dan Kahan and Ashley Landrum and their colleagues, where they started looking at two different things. in the x-axis, you can see the ordinary science intelligence. That's just someone's education, right? And on the y-axis, you have the probability of agreeing with the statement that there is solid evidence of recent global warming due mostly to human activities such as burning fossil fuels. That basically like believing in the risk of climate change. And you would think if, information provision is great, then when people have more education, they're more likely to believe in the risk of climate change. But climate change is a very polarized issue, right? So you look at it and you're like, oh, with liberal, the more educated you are, the more likely you believe in the risk of climate change. But then you look at conservatives, and the more educated they are, the less likely they're to believe in the risk of climate change. And that might be because you're more educated, you have better tools to justify your point of view, right? So that's when you realize, okay, there's like a lot of different impacts that you have in mind, like the impact of getting something to learn something that does not translate into your final impact, which is a behavior change or an attitude change. So you can think of other impacts where you might have more evidence to support it. For example, you can think of emotions, right? If a lot of these problems are emotional, things that you will react intensely to, then maybe some of your solution is to elicit an impact which is emotional. An example is, for example, the Voyager spacecraft, right? So if your goal is to get the public to support space exploration, you have different ways. Like you can educate people about the importance of exploration. Or you can also have impact by eliciting different emotions, different senses. It could be a sense of wonder. It could be curiosity. It could be awe. So I could give you all the data and tell you about everything, or I could do something else. So here in this clip that we have from the documentary Furthest, we are showing how scientists are experiencing what the images are that are coming from Voyager and kind of like that excitement that comes with it.
Become junkies. This is how you become a planetary flyby junkie. It's because you've gone through one of them and you just know it's the greatest feeling and you want to keep doing it again and again.
So we saw in that film that it's kind of like you get that excitement, that emotion that they're experiencing, right? Because you get the scientists being excited and you have that artistic feeling of awe and everything. So that's another way to kind of like elicit all of those feelings. And hopefully that might be another way to like cause that impact. The example that I chose from the list of visualization, one that I really loved was the visualization of the blue whales for the museum displays. And I think one of the reasons I like it is that it just covers such different objectives to get to that final impact, right? So for example, here you get to see a lot of educational material. You get to see about the size of the blue whale, but you're able to kind of like relate that to your own weight and height, right? Like you see, what's your height and how does that relate to a blue whale? So you're learning something, but you're also relating it to yourself. And you also get messages of different emotions. So it's not all doom and gloom. You also get the message of hope of, oh my God, look at how great these whales are. And you change your belief that they're not just this like majestic, beautiful things. They're also actually really helping with the carbon emission. And not only that, we think of always whales dying, but look at that towards the end of the, towards the 2050, right? Hopefully we're going to see them actually, the population growth. So there's a lot of messages of hope, a lot of positive emotions. And I think that's a good way of thinking about our impact, right? Like you can even show people that, hey, and not only you're learning all of that, not only you have all these emotions, there's something you could do about it. And we know, for example, with climate change, something around 1 out of 7 people do want to do something about climate change. They just don't know what to do about it, right? So you're now getting like a full spectrum of different impacts. And I think this is just something to remember when we're thinking about our impact, that there are things you could do, objectives that you could have, that it works in some places and it does not work in other places. So how can we choose those impacts, especially if they're informed by the literature, by the research, where we can tell like, okay, maybe in this issues, this objective is one that the impact is actually going to help us get to that final goal. In another case, that might not be happening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If we could bring up the Zoom with our panelists. And Min, if you would join us up here as well. Well, thank you all very much for joining. I wanted just to maybe start with some questions and take some from the audience as well. But I was struck by something that Zach said about how you realize, because I've felt the same thing myself. We just always hear it. I think it certainly seems to be orthodoxy in climate communications that people aren't convinced by charts and graphs. They need to hear human stories, but you went ahead and did that. And I just wanted to ask Rehana, is that really true, that people are not convinced by charts and graphs?
Yeah, I unfortunately, there are issues that maybe a chart and graph might be helpful. So I'm like, I'm trying to decide between buying this shoe or that shoe, and there's a chart that says, hey, here's all the reasons this shoe is better, and I don't have that many emotional connection to it. In that case, a chart and graph might be great, right? But if I have a reason to not want to believe in something, my whole community is not believing in it, my values are connected to it, my personal identity is connected to it, then that chart, that graph might not be really changing my mind, because you just want to find all the excuses to say well, actually this chart might be wrong, right? Or this is fake news, or this is not what you should be thinking about. I have seen other charts that are different. And to that point, there is this idea of storytelling and narratives could be actually very helpful, because something that they do is, they kind of use this narrative transportation, where you feel I can put myself in someone else's shoes. I can feel their feelings. And you have really good narratives that know how to be you're a great person with what you're believing. And if you're changing your mind, you're still a good person. So I'm not going to attack your identity. I'm not judging you. I'm showing you a narrative in which you can change your mind and still be the good person that you are. So definitely there with Zach.
Thank you. Another question goes, this one has to do with how we reach different audiences and where we reach them. So I know many of you are working in different areas. And so let me actually start with, so I'm thinking of Andrea's work, that focus on public spaces and the kind of people that come into a public space. And then and Zach, in particular, using the internet and Twitter sort of as a public space. So maybe could I ask each of you to comment a little bit about, let's start with Zach, but that environment and the kinds of people you reach, and maybe concerns about maybe the kinds of people you're not reaching?
Yeah, sure. I guess when I initially started, using social media, specifically Twitter as an outlet, I thought, I'm only going to be reaching people in my sphere, other scientists. And sort of my goal with this was, I'm hoping to reach other audiences. And I think I was then taken by surprise after some time of how Twitter can actually be a useful tool to reach other audiences beyond, scientists. I can sort of look at my analytics and demographics through Twitter to see that, I'm no longer, predominantly followed by scientists. And to me, that's one of the advantages that I don't know how, without a tool like Twitter or social media, how I would be able to reach some of the audiences I do to share some of the climate data that's going on. So to me, I see it's really been one of the advantages of audiences I could have never imagined reaching just a few years ago.
Andrea?
Yeah, I want to first speak to something that Rianya was talking about with these. Are you impacted by a graphic or by a visualization? And I think that one thing that happens is that people learn to read these over time, and it can happen really quickly. It can happen over the course of an evening, watching a projection change over time if a truck pulls up to a sensor and things change. I think as people feel like they learned the visualization, they take more ownership and they give it more veracity as well, because they've learned it, even if they're not experts. And just in terms of the reaching people question. Some of the most impactful presentations of my work have been in partnership with advocacy organizations who have really done amazing work in terms of getting the message out that this thing is happening, and it happens to be related to a policy issue that you can vote on in the next weeks. And there are wraps on buses advertising that this thing is happening and this visualization is happening. So it definitely is. I mean, even a large scale public artwork also benefits from other kinds of media promotion in order to reach audiences and get people down to see it.
Thank you. And now a question for Min. Well, just to elaborate on something you brought up during your presentation, and that is, I think a lot of our efforts around climate communication have been really focused on the sort of extreme, in some cases, climate denialism, and this sort of battle to convince people that climate change is real. But I'm also feeling hopeful that maybe this battle is breaking, and we're going to reach a time when this will no longer be a battle. It will be accepted that our climate is changing, that humans are causing that change. The question is, where does climate science, visual communication go from there? What do we do next? So you started to answer that question, but I don't know if you have anything more to add.
Thank you, Mark. In fact, I really sort of quite appreciate Rihanna's talk about the, and in fact, she selected the blue whale. The visualization happened to be my favorite because the contextualization mentioned, and Rihanna also mentioned the positive emotion, which is really important. So I really reinforce the idea is somehow we need engaging ordinary sort of public to get more action, so they feel. In fact, I had the same feeling sort of during the summer over Europe, and I was traveling around in Europe, and this time the whole family decided to use train only, and but I thought about it. I would love to have a web page. I can type in some sort of numbers or whatever, how many miles or the kilometers I traveled, use train instead of using airplane. Although we pay them more, spend more time on the train, but what would be the positive impact? And that may stimulate the positive emotion, as Rihanna said. So that is, I hope we can do a little bit more on that.
From other panelists, any comments on sort of the post-denial era of?
I have a question more than a comment. Why do you think that we're headed towards a post-denial era? I don't feel like I see that.
Well, I'm just optimist by nature, I guess. But and certainly I don't want to stray too much into the politics, but I think there's definitely a generational shift. And I think Rihanna probably knows these numbers better than I do, but I think if you look at the acceptance of climate change by generation, we're seeing a pretty dramatic shift.
Definitely, I think that, and also I think one of the latest data was that 7 out of 10 Americans wants to do something about climate change. They just don't know what it is. So I think there's a shift from like trying to change people to believe in the risk of climate change. There's like other kind of shifts. So something I think Zach also mentioned, it's like this idea of climate change is happening right now and right here. It's not something for the future. So that might be something to change, because if it's in the future and it's not happening to me, then I don't know if I need to do something about it. I believe that it's happening, just not to me personally. Or that I know it's happening, I just do not know at all what to do about it. I might be there's so much climate anxiety in the new generation and the Gen Z that there might be like climate paralysis, like anxiety that comes with it. So what are some of the ways we could address some of those actions, some of those here and now, and that self-efficacy that you could do something about it?
Thank you. And let me close with one final question. I guess staying on this question, while we're in this era, while climate science is being questioned, the visualizations around climate science are being actively argued against, there's a real need to build trust in the visualizations we create. So I would just maybe like to hear from the different presenters about what we can do to build trust in our visualization products. Maybe start with you, Zach.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something I think a lot about when I share so many graphs is how do I build trust in this graph that, I'm correctly looking at the right data and, analyzing it, visualizing it correctly. And I think it's really being open about data. Climate science kind of has a rough history of, building trust and transparency around where is the climate data coming from? How do we manipulate the data? What is a climate model doing, in this black box? So I think as visualizers, by being even more transparent about our methods, here is the raw data. Here are the scientists where the raw data came from. Here's how we manipulate it. And here are our methods. To me, that is a really important component, at least how I think of communicating data visualization, is to always focus where is the data coming from if you want to learn more?
I think this is a really good question, and I've been thinking that for a long time, and being someone working on the mathematics behind explaining how visualization works, and I'm fully aware, and all the visualization has a risk to introduce biases, and the last thing we want is we have a climate gate for visualization. So I ask every folk to be careful in the disseminated visualization to keep in and we don't want that to happen. That will affect the good cause of the climate science, and is doing a lot of good job, and we don't want the making problems through the dissemination part of the work.
I just want to comment, they're not hearing too well on the microphone. So just when you're speaking at the mic, try to get close.
Should I go next?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we know from research, 4 of the main things you need to build trust. You don't need all of it, but like a combination of those. The first thing is competence, right? And that's just to show that, hey, I know what I'm talking about. If this is my data visualization, I have the credentials, I know what I'm talking about. It's coming from NASA, right? So NASA already has that competence. So that's one of the things. The second thing is just honesty that we were just talking about, right? So it's showing your honesty, showing your integrity, transparency, that here's what my data is coming from. Here's what I know. If you have made a mistake about your data before, be honest, talk about it. If there is something you don't know about your data, let your audience know that you don't know and you don't have all the answers. The third thing is care and benevolence, and that might show up. It might be in your data, right? It might be in your data visualization when you're like, I'm showing you a data visualization that you could use in your daily life. Or it could be sometimes you show your data and you as a scientist are next to that, right? You're standing next to your data visualization and you show your care, you show your benevolence by smiling, being able to like interact positively with your audience. And that comes next to the last thing that I think is super important, and that's listening and being open. And that might be when you have engagement with your data visualization, right? You're like, so what do you think that is, right? And this is something that I think Mark knows better than anyone because of his astronomy conversation initiatives, but it's not about me proving something to you. I'm just going to show you visualization and I'm going to say, what do you want to know about it? What do you think this is? What is a question that you have? What do you think about it, right? So you're open and you're showing that listening. And it's that relationship that might be between you and a scientist that is like this right next to that data visualization, or the visualization that you're like, oh, I think I can trust that somehow.
I think, in addition to what we've already talked about and Minna's talked about with actionable visualization and the idea that people are learning a visualization like the Fitbit model, there's also, as a different tack, there's another layer, I think, that between the scientists doing the visualization and the general public, or reaching a wide audience. And Zach is doing, reaching his audience directly, but I think, like you had mentioned, Mark, Ed Hawkins, warming stripes. You see these stripes turn into banners at protests. You see them turn into bike paths. You see them turn into blankets. And there's a peer group then that other people who might not engage directly with data visualization are getting that from another peer from their group, and that is giving that the credibility. It doesn't have to be credibility of NASA or of a scientist. It could be credibility of my neighbor. And then I would also posit, and this really comes from seeing a lot of the visualizations that have been shown today, and Francesca's work, of course. I think this naturalistic and complex visualization has a level of not only beauty, as Francesca mentioned, but credibility in looking like the natural world and having some connection to us and our experience of the natural world. There's an idea called vibrancy that I've been really interested in, and it's the experience that people have of light through the leaves of a tree or dancing on the surface of water, and that gives actually there's a physical and psychological impact, positive impact that something like that can have. And I think that maybe that's another thing to look at that creates credibility in your visualizations.
Well, thank you, and I'd very much like to thank all of our panelists for a wonderful discussion. I'll let Ray, you got to get on a plane, right? I hope we're not going to make you late for your
my flight got delayed. So.
Oh, good. I was worried while you were still here, but thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate it. What? Oh, do we have time though? You sure? 'Cause
there are a number of questions on Slido, but we can ask them to go to Discord or.
Okay, we'll take one question from the.
Okay. So these are all equally. Oh no, okay. So you have all shared some really innovative and unique work in communicating climate change with the public. As people who are innovating in this area, what are some pet peeves about the old ways of climate science communication that you have? How does the field need to change?
I can give an answer because I touched on this already a little bit, is that in the past for communicating climate science, there has been a tendency to sort of avoid the data and talk about what is a climate model, or how do we use things like tree rings to know what the temperature was thousands of years ago, and not be transparent about those methods. And I still think there is some hesitancy to avoid talking about what goes on behind the scenes. And I would encourage people interested in science communication to be more transparent about those methods and to talk about, and you can frame it in a really cool story. And I have a friend in grad school who used to go spelunking in caves in Southeast Asia to reconstruct rainfall going back for thousands of years using stalagmites. And so you can talk about all of these really amazing methods that scientists use, which then, morph into these data visualizations that we talk about how we know climate change is real. So I would, again, really encourage people to talk more about the awesome stories behind the scenes of the data.
Something that I fall into, so this is me not pointing fingers at myself, is not strategizing. So I think we all want to be in, like, who's your audience? Like, everyone is my audience. What do you want to change? I want to get everyone to believe in climate change, and I want everyone to do something about climate change. And that's just not realistic. And I think sometimes we just have to make ourselves decide, this is my audience. So if I'm providing information and data, I probably am not talking to directly the person that is completely not there to believe in climate change. Maybe this is for someone that already believes it and is looking for information on how to change this very specific thing. So if I think of it like that, then I know where that person is, where to go, where to put my data visualization, what not to do, right? Instead of thinking I'm going to make this about information provision for everyone in the world and all the different platforms. So just being strategic about how we do data visualization.
So the question was about a pet peeve, which is, I'm sorry, I have one. So I think that with climate data, climate is about nature, and we have a lot of visceral experience with that. And when I see climate data in the rainbow color map, which is so synthetic, jarring, whereas the scientific community understands it. Mind you, we've done lots of studies that tell you it doesn't predict the data. It just doesn't show data very well. But it's off-putting. It's off-putting to a general audience. So if your visualization is going out beyond your door, I don't think that that's serving us well. And I still see so much of it.
I mean, not making a popular demand. So it is common for the scientists thinking the visualization is for the other people rather than for themselves. And what I really would like to encourage the climate scientists to broaden their modeling efforts, not only modeling the global phenomenon, which is the temperature for the whole entire world. Think about the slightly more local models, or model different phenomena, hurricanes, flooding, and insects, disease, and thinking about that broaden that scope so people can relate to the climate change a little bit more. I know it's challenging. Most people would say the statistics is not good enough, but visualization can help. Thank you.
I just really like that, because I remember clearly in my mind when the refugees were dying off the coast of Greece, there was a single boy that was on a beach in England somewhere, and it just made my heart swell. But when you hear about 100, you don't. And the analogy is that a local breaking down the whole big piece is something we can relate to. It's local, it's one phenomena, and that it brings it a little closer to our experience.
Yeah, I would just add to that, don't be afraid to bring your voice as a scientist into what you're sharing. Zach has been doing it wonderfully, and I think it's really adds to that impact, that individual experience.
Okay, so a big thank you to all the panelists. If there are more questions, there are questions in the virtual platform and Slido, and I think Kel has guided our virtual panelists to Slido, right, on Discord right now, on Discord. So I would greatly appreciate if you can jump on Discord and if you're available and answer some of the questions. Kel is going to be able to guide you if you don't know where to go. So with that, I have some closing remarks. Please, if we can switch. So today, during our half-day workshop on high impact techniques for visual climate science communication, we had a keynote from Ed Hawkins where he suggested to basically start climate conversations using visualizations. Then we saw a diverse group of works that our jury team selected as a high impact visual climate science communication efforts. We had an AR apps and visualizations created by our studio, dome shows, and also experimental data visualizations leveraging physicalization. And then later on, we actually just had a panel session. All this we would not have been able to accomplish without help and support from many people. Here I'm listing also our jurors, our submitters, the accepted authors, and of course we want to thank all the people that submitted works, even though they were not accepted, because they helped us think about, what data visualization for climate science communication means. I would like also to extend a special thanks to people that supported this effort, even though they were, let's say, not involved, and my colleagues and all the Vis 2022 workshop tech and program chairs and student volunteers. On the last note, we are hiring. We have 3 new positions to support the NASA's Earth Information Center. If you're interested, please contact us. Here are our emails. We're going to be posting, I think, these jobs also at the job poster board, job postings. And they are also on Discord. Well, with that, thank you all.